July 14, 1944. Northern Saipan, Mariana Islands. The jungle humidity hung like wet cloth in the pre-dawn darkness, and through it came a sound that no Japanese soldier had heard before in the Pacific War. Not the high-pitched whine of aircraft engines or the distant rumble of naval guns, but something closer, something mechanical and predatory, advancing through the volcanic soil and crushed coral. The growl of diesel engines, multiple machines moving in coordination, their treads grinding over terrain that should have stopped wheeled vehicles. Lieutenant Sakai Oba crouched in his coral outcrop position overlooking the Tanapag Plain and tried to identify what was approaching through the gloom. Tanks, certainly, but their silhouettes seemed wrong. Too tall, too angular, with long barrels that protruded from open-topped turrets like the snouts of hunting beasts. When the first shell struck the reinforced bunker 200 meters to his left, the entire structure seemed to lift from the ground before collapsing inward. Coral and concrete, and men simply ceasing to exist in a blast that rattled teeth and compressed air from lungs. The lieutenant had expected American tanks. He had not expected this. These steel creatures that could reach out across 1,000 meters and erase fortified positions as though they were made of paper. In the summer of 1944, the Japanese Army's tactical doctrine for combating armor remained rooted in experiences from China and Malaya, campaigns where they had faced British and Chinese forces equipped with light tanks and limited mechanized support. The standard anti-tank weapon in Japanese infantry units was the Type 1 47mm gun, a respectable piece of artillery adequate for penetrating the armor of pre-war designs. For closer engagements, soldiers carried magnetic mines and satchel charges, relying on individual courage to compensate for technological deficiency. The doctrine emphasized concealment, allowing enemy armor to advance into close range before infantry assaulted from hidden positions. It was a tactic born of necessity. Japan's industrial capacity could not match American tank production, so Japanese infantry trained to become the anti-tank weapon themselves, human beings transformed into expendable ammunition. The approach had worked in the early war years, when Allied armor was scarce and coordination poor. But the American machines now landing on Saipan's beaches were not the light tanks of Bataan and Singapore. They were something the Japanese planning staff had not adequately prepared for, and the failure of imagination would cost. Thousands of lives. The M10 tank destroyer arrived in the Pacific theater carrying a reputation forged in the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes. Officially designated the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, it mounted a 76mm high-velocity gun on a modified Sherman tank chassis, creating a platform capable of engaging enemy armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The design philosophy diverged from traditional tank doctrine. The M10 sacrificed the fully enclosed turret and heavy armor of a main battle tank in favor of speed, firepower, and rapid deployment. Its open-topped turret reduced weight and improved crew visibility, while the powerful gun could penetrate 4 inches of armor at 1,000 yards. In the European theater, M10s had been designed to hunt German tigers and panthers. But on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, they discovered a different purpose. With almost no Japanese armor to engage, the tank destroyers became mobile artillery platforms, bunker busters that could maneuver to firing positions that conventional artillery could not reach, then unleash precision fire against fortifications that had been designed to withstand everything except point-blank fire from heavy guns. The Japanese defenders had prepared Saipan with the meticulous attention to terrain that characterized their defensive doctrine. Every cave entrance was surveyed, every ridgeline fortified, every approach covered by interlocking fields of fire. Coastal guns positioned in coral caves could engage landing craft. Inland bunkers constructed from reinforced concrete and coral aggregate could withstand hits from naval shells. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The beaches could not be held, but the interior highlands could be transformed into a killing ground where American numerical superiority would be neutralized by terrain and fortification. The Japanese garrison of 31,000 troops had spent months preparing positions, stockpiling ammunition, and training for the final battle. What they had not prepared for was the combination of American tactical flexibility and mechanical abundance that would arrive with the invasion force. On June 15, 1944, when the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions stormed Saipan's beaches, they brought with them an entire mechanized ecosystem: Shermans for direct assault, LVT Amtraks for supply across reef and beach, self-propelled howitzers for mobile artillery support, and the M10 tank destroyers, initially held in reserve, their true utility not yet understood by commanders who viewed them primarily as anti-tank weapons for a theater with minimal enemy armor. But as Marine infantry encountered the layered Japanese defenses, as companies bogged down before bunkers that shrugged off mortar fire and bazooka rounds, a new employment doctrine emerged organically from the necessities of combat. Tank destroyers could be called forward to specific coordinates, could maneuver close enough to bring direct fire onto targets, and could deliver high-explosive shells with enough velocity to penetrate the reinforced positions that had stalled the American advance. The transformation of the high-feet M10's role happened in increments measured, in blood and meters of ground. A Marine company pinned down by a bunker complex would radio for armor support. Shermans would advance, but their 75mm guns, firing at oblique angles, could not penetrate the thickest fortifications. Then an M10 would rumble forward, its crew scanning for the bunker's firing aperture, and the long barrel would traverse until the gunner acquired the target. The 76mm round, fired at nearly 3,000 feet per second, would strike with enough kinetic energy to punch through 2 feet of reinforced concrete. The effect inside the bunker would be catastrophic, not merely the explosion of the shell itself, but the spray of concrete fragments turned into shrapnel, the overpressure wave in enclosed space. The psychological impact of a position designed to be impregnable suddenly proven fatally vulnerable. Word spread among both the Marine infantry and the Japanese. Defenders, the open-topped tanks with the long guns, could kill anything. For the Japanese, soldiers observing this new weapon from their prepared positions, the M10 represented a doctrinal nightmare. Their anti-tank tactics required close engagement, getting within meters of enemy armor to attach magnetic mines or thrust satchel charges into treads and hatches. But the tank destroyers operated at ranges that made such suicidal courage meaningless. A Type 1 47mm gun might, under ideal conditions, penetrate an M10's side armor at 300 meters. But the M10 could identify and destroy the anti-tank gun from 1,000 meters away, often before the Japanese crew could even acquire the target. The mathematical asymmetry was crushing. Even when Japanese infantry managed to stalk within assault range, the M10's open turret meant the crew could maintain 360-degree awareness, and the machine gun mounted for anti-aircraft defense proved devastatingly effective against infantry at close range. The tank destroyer nullified the one advantage Japanese tactics had relied upon: the willingness of individual soldiers to sacrifice themselves at close range. When the close range itself became unreachable, courage turned into pointless death. The numbers documented the M10's impact with bureaucratic precision. After-action reports from the 733th Abendtraut Anti-Mannschatten Tank Destroyer Battalion, which landed with the invasion force, recorded 127 bunkers destroyed, 43 cave positions neutralized, and innumerable instances of infantry support during the 25 days of fighting for Saipan. But the statistical accounting could not capture the psychological dimension of the weapon's effect. Japanese soldiers had been trained to endure naval bombardment by retreating into caves, to survive aerial attack by dispersing and concealing positions, to outlast artillery barrages in deep bunkers. These were survivable threats, random and impersonal. The M10 was different. It was precise, persistent, and seemingly capable of reaching anywhere. A bunker that had withstood 3 days of shelling could be silenced in minutes once a tank destroyer received its coordinates. Cave positions that were invisible to aerial reconnaissance could be methodically sealed by direct fire once Marine patrols identified their locations. Lieutenant Oba, who would become one of the last Japanese officers to surrender after the war, later described the psychological weight of facing American mechanized firepower. The American tanks themselves were concerning but comprehensible. Machines that could be countered with tactics, if not with weapons. But the tank destroyers represented something more disturbing. The sense that the enemy possessed not just more equipment, but different categories of equipment, specialized tools for every tactical problem. When Japanese forces massed for night attacks, M10s would be positioned as mobile artillery, firing high-explosive shells into assembly areas identified by intelligence. When a defensive position proved particularly stubborn, M10s would be called forward for what amounted to mechanical execution. The Americans seemed to have a machine for every purpose, and the abundance of their equipment made losses irrelevant. An M10 disabled by a lucky hit from a 47mm gun would be replaced within hours, towed away and substituted as though the destruction of such a sophisticated weapon was merely an administrative inconvenience. The symbolic weight of the tank destroyer extended beyond its tactical utility. For Japanese soldiers indoctrinated in the belief that spirit and determination could overcome material disadvantage, the M10 became evidence of a different philosophy of warfare. American combat doctrine did not ask soldiers to charge bunkers with satchel charges. It brought forward a specialized machine to eliminate the bunker from a safe distance. It did not demand individual sacrifice as a primary tactic. It employed mechanical abundance to reduce casualties. The open-topped turret, which Japanese commanders initially viewed as a vulnerability, actually represented a doctrinal confidence. American designers believed their forces would maintain air superiority and didn't need to armor the top of the turret against aerial attack. That assumption, which proved entirely correct, spoke to a level of theater-wide dominance that Japanese forces could not counter. By late July, as organized resistance on Saipan collapsed into desperate final charges, the surviving Japanese soldiers had developed a grim catalog of American weapons and their effects. The naval shells that turned hillsides into moonscapes, the aircraft that could strike with precision or carpet bomb with incendiaries, the flamethrower tanks that made caves into crematoriums. And among all of these instruments of industrial warfare, the M10 held a particular place, the machine that could be anywhere, that could kill anything, that represented the American ability to bring overwhelming force to bear on individual tactical problems. In the final banzai charge on July 7th, when thousands of Japanese soldiers and civilians surged across the Tanapag Plain in a suicide attack, M10s positioned in the rear echelons fired over open sights into the mass of humanity. Their high-explosive shells detonating in clusters of bodies, the precision weapon reduced to a tool of slaughter by the desperation of an enemy that had run out of options except death. The tank destroyers continued their Pacific service through the rest of the war, landing on Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Their tactical employment became increasingly sophisticated. Coordination with infantry patrols improved. Communication systems allowed for faster response to calls for fire support, and crews developed techniques for engaging targets in the complex cave terrain of the volcanic islands. On Iwo Jima, M10s from the 706th Tank Destroyer Battalion worked systematically to reduce the hundreds of bunkers and pillboxes that honeycombed Mount Suribachi. Their 76-meter guns reaching into fortifications that had been designed to be immune to anything except direct hits from battleship guns. On Okinawa, tank destroyers supported the grinding advance through the Shuri Line, engaging Japanese positions that had been carved into the limestone ridges and could only be destroyed by direct fire from heavy weapons. But the impact extended beyond the tactical. For the Japanese military leadership observing the progression of defeats across the Pacific, the American mechanized forces represented an industrial capacity that could not be matched or countered. Japan had begun the war with qualitative advantages in certain areas: better torpedoes, superior night fighting tactics, longer-range aircraft. But by 1944, American production had not merely caught up, but had created entirely new categories of weapons specialized for specific tactical situations. The tank destroyer was one example among dozens: the LVT for reef crossing, the flamethrower tank for bunker assault, the proximity-fused anti-aircraft shell, the specialized landing craft for vehicle delivery. Each represented resources devoted to solving particular problems, the kind of engineering and manufacturing investment that Japan's overstretched economy simply could not replicate. For the individual Japanese soldier encountering an M10 across a battlefield, the ideological implications were inescapable. The empire's propaganda had emphasized spiritual strength, the superiority of the warrior ethos, the weakness of American materialism. But here was material abundance transformed into tactical reality. Not just more weapons, but better weapons, specialized weapons, weapons deployed with the casual confidence of a nation that could afford to design different machines for different purposes. The tank destroyer's open turret, which should have been a vulnerability, functioned perfectly because American air superiority made it safe. The powerful gun, which could have been mounted on a heavier chassis, instead went on a lighter, faster platform because American doctrine emphasized mobility. Every aspect of the M10's design reflected strategic assumptions that proved correct. We will control the air. We will have enough of these machines that losing some is acceptable. We will encounter tactical problems that require specialized solutions, and we can afford to build those solutions. The war ended with thousands of M10s scattered across the Pacific and European theaters. Some eventually scrapped, others sold to allied nations, a few preserved in museums where they still stand with their long barrels elevated, metal monuments to a particular moment in the evolution of mechanized warfare. But their deeper legacy lived in the memories of those who had faced them from the wrong side of the gun. The soldiers who had been trained to believe that courage and sacrifice could overcome material disadvantage, only to discover that some material advantages were simply too large to overcome with any amount of courage. The tank destroyers had not won the Pacific War alone. No single weapon system could claim that distinction. But they had exemplified a particular American approach to combat. Identify the problem, engineer a solution, produce it in quantity, deploy it effectively, and accept losses as a cost of doing business rather than a catastrophic failure. In the decades after, military historians would debate the M10's effectiveness, noting its vulnerabilities in European tank combat, questioning whether its specialized design was worth the production resources. But such debates missed the deeper significance. The tank destroyer's true impact was not merely what it destroyed, but what it represented: the capacity of an industrial democracy to transform manufacturing capability into military power, to create specialized tools for particular purposes, to approach warfare as an engineering problem that could be solved through systematic application of resources and ingenuity. For the Japanese soldiers who had watched those angular silhouettes maneuver across Saipan's plains, who had cowered in bunkers that suddenly proved no protection at all, who had tried to apply tactics designed for a different kind of war against an enemy fighting with different rules entirely, the lesson was written in high-velocity steel. Abundance deployed with precision becomes unstoppable, and a nation that can afford to build different machines for different problems has already won the war of industrial attrition. The M10s simply made that abstract truth concrete, one bunker at a time, until there were no more bunkers, and no more soldiers, and nothing left but the memory of that sound. Diesel engines and grinding treads and the crack of a 76-meter gun reaching across the distance that courage alone could never cross.